Good morning and happy Christmas Eve. We're going to be making some rum cakes today. I'm going to show you how easy this can be. Now we're starting with all of our ingredients ready to go, mise en place. Hands are washed. We've brushed under our nails. We're wearing no jewelry. If we're wearing false nails or jewelry, we're going to be wearing gloves. Okay, so let's start out with our dry ingredients. First, we need flour. We're going to use 3 cups of flour. Ideally, you would probably use cake flour for this. But I don't have any cake flour at the moment. And also, cake flour is significantly more expensive. I like the Swan's Down brand than all-purpose flour. If you don't bake a lot, cake flour is going to get wasted in your pantry. So let's use all-purpose flour. And because we're not using cake flour, we're also going to add a teaspoon of cornstarch for the 3 cups of flour for this cake. So again, that was 3 cups of flour. And we're also going to add a teaspoon of cornstarch to make up for the cake flour. Cake flour is more finely milled and it has a lower gluten content. If you are gluten-free, you can absolutely use the King Arthur brand gluten-free measure for measure flour. So 1-to-1 substitute. So that would be 3 cups of this. And then I would also add the 1 teaspoon of cornstarch. We're also going to use 1 tablespoon of baking powder. Make sure this is not the same as baking soda. We are also using baking soda. We're going to use half of a teaspoon of baking soda. As you can see, this container is open. Now, baking soda has a pretty short shelf life. I've heard some people say 6 months after the time you open it. I think it's closer to 3. The way that you can check if your baking soda is still active and if it's going to work and help your cake to rise properly is you can just put a little bit into a little spoon here and add some vinegar. It reacts with vinegar. So watch this. So that definitely reacted. You can see that it bubbled up. So we know that our baking soda is definitely good for use. When you're storing baking soda, you want to put it in a place where you don't have odorific things. So we're not going to put it in the fridge. We're not going to put it in the cabinet where we keep our Indian spices. Keep it somewhere away from other smells because it will pick up other smells. Once it is less active, you can still put it in the refrigerator in the back and it will still help to absorb smells. It just can't be used for cooking. All right, we're also going to use as our dry ingredients 1 pack of the 3-ounce vanilla jello pudding mix. Now, I regret that I do use this just because it is it makes it feel less homemade. But I would also say there aren't a ton of fake ingredients in the Jello brand vanilla pudding. It's mostly just a little bit of natural or artificial flavor and sugar a little bit, and it's cornstarch. This is even more cornstarch. Cornstarch acts to make your cake nice and soft and velvety. As for our spices, now these are technically optional, but I really hope that you won't leave them out. Some of these, like cardamom, are a little bit expensive. So if you know a baker who probably has this, you can just ask to have a little bit. You don't have to spend $5 or $6 on this. I'm going to use half of a teaspoon of ground cardamom. I'm going to use half of a teaspoon of nutmeg, and I'm going to use 1/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon. Okay. Okay, now all of these ingredients have been added to a bowl. These are all my dry ingredients, and I'm going to whisk this very, very well. We whisk for a few reasons. One, it is to make sure that all the ingredients are evenly incorporated. No one wants to bite into, a bitter bite of baking powder or baking soda. But it also helps to aerate our flour, and it also breaks up any lumps that might be in the flour or the sugar. There's one ingredient that I forgot to tell you about, which I just put in here, and that is 1 teaspoon of salt. You do need a tiny bit of salt in all of your baked goods. Salt helps sweet things taste even sweeter. So I am going off camera, I am going to whisk this even further. I'm going to whisk this for about a good 2-3 minutes. Alternatively, if you have a sieve, you can sift all of these ingredients. Whenever you think you have whisked or sifted enough, whisk or sift again. I recommend that you sift this about 3, 4, or even 5 times. And then whisking, I'm going to give this like 2-3 minutes. But I'll do that off camera. Okay, now as to our wet ingredients, I'm using a stand mixer. You can absolutely use a hand mixer. I had a hand mixer that lasted me for years. It was the Hamilton Beach $12 from Walmart mixer until I finally burned out the motor. But 12 bucks, I think, right now at Walmart, and they'll last you for years. I am using a stand mixer. If you end up doing this by hand with a whisk, that is absolutely fine. It's just going to take you a good 3 to 5 minutes at least to whisk this, and it's going to give you a really good arm workout. Make sure that before you move your whisk from any dry ingredients that have glutinous flour, that you really rinse well your whisk. So here I have 2 sticks of butter, and they are completely at room temperature. Incidentally, let's make sure all of your materials are at room temperature whenever you bake, unless the recipe calls for otherwise. Now, you can use salted or unsalted butter. I am using salted today. You will find that a lot of recipes specify unsalted butter just because in the olden days, like in the 1960s, there was a lot of non-standardization for the amount of salt that came in a recipe. These days, butter has way less salt because we're aware of like what salt does to our body. So the amount of salt in there is negligible. Feel free to use salted or unsalted. It's really not going to make a big difference in this cake. I'm using salted. Keep your wrapper, because what you're going to do is you're going to use this to grease and flour your cake pan. Now I'm going to use my beater here, and I'm going to beat this butter for a minute. I'm going to let it whip up, and then I'm going to add my other wet ingredient, which is 1 cup of light brown sugar and 1 cup of white sugar. Now when you measure flour, you will use a spoon and you will spoon the flour in, and that avoids adding too much flour. You actually do the opposite with brown sugar. You're going to pack that brown sugar in as well as you can. Now some people will ask, but how is this a wet ingredient? It looks dry. If you put this in a saucepan, sugar, it's going to liquefy. If you put flour into a saucepan and heat it up, it will stay dry. It will probably toast and turn brown, but it will stay dry. So this is actually a wet ingredient as per the way that we treat baking ingredients. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to beat this for about 30 seconds. We'll gradually add our sugars, 1 cup of brown and 1 cup of white. And then, little by little, we will add 5 eggs. Now I have my eggs soaking in water because I didn't remove them the night before. And so I wanted to quickly get them up to room temperature, so I just put them in some warm water. It only takes a few minutes. They're now at room temp. So let's get started on that. Okay. Okay, so I have creamed well the butter and sugar. You really need to beat it a lot so that we incorporate a lot of air and we get it evenly mixed. It's a good idea to use a spatula at least once during the process. And I'm just going to show you, give you an idea for how hard I beat it. I beat this. Really needs to whip to get a lot of air into it. So definitely use a silicone spatula at least once in the process to scrape down those sides so that you're getting all of the sugar incorporated. We're going to start adding our eggs one at a time. I do like to crack my eggs into the separate bowl. This is the same bowl I used for the sugar, because if there's any shell that comes into here, I can easily fish it out, which it's a lot harder to do once it's in the batter. So I'll start adding these one by one. I'll give it a mix, let the mixer mix for like 2-3 rounds, and then another egg, and you can cut. So we have our butter, our sugars, and our eggs evenly incorporated, and we scrape down the sides. Oh no, I don't think I want that. All right, so we have evenly incorporated our butter, 2 sticks of butter, our 5 eggs, and our 1 cup of white sugar, 1 cup of brown sugar. And we're now going to add a few other things here. We're going to add 1/3 of a cup of oil. Now, butter, cakes that are strictly butter, they are very rich, but they have a tendency to get dry. What happens to butter? When you melt it, it gets liquid. When you put it, that same melted butter back in the fridge, it gets hard again, right? So we don't want a hard cake. So we're going to put in 1/3 of a cup of some neutral oil. I like canola oil. You can also use vegetable oil, any neutral oil. So in other words, not olive oil. So 1/3 of a cup of oil goes in. We're going to add some vanilla. Do not waste your money on expensive vanilla. Real vanilla is only helpful for things where the vanilla is the star of the show, like vanilla ice cream or vanilla birthday cake. Here we have a lot of other assertive flavors, so that would be a waste. Feel free to use fake vanilla. I'm using about a tablespoon of vanilla. We're going to use, oh, I just want to show you, I do have real vanilla. So it's not that I don't have it. I still keep it on hand. Now, normally I would encourage you to use almond extract. I would say use about 1/2 teaspoon. Please don't skip this step. I am going to skip this step because we have a couple of people who have tree nut allergies, and I'm just not taking the chance. I've heard that almond extract is often made in processes that will not trigger nut allergies. We're not taking the chance. And then this is optional, but please consider doing it. It really adds something special. This is Jamaican rose water. And when I tell you, I'm just adding the tiniest drop. Tiny, tiny drop. It really makes a big difference. We're also going to add 1 cup of buttermilk. Now you can just use regular milk. If what you have in the house is regular milk, use regular milk. Don't waste your money to go out and buy buttermilk. I already had buttermilk, and you could probably get a good 3 rum cakes if you buy buttermilk, so consider that. It's not going to end up being a waste. We're going to add some rum. Now, some people like to add a little dark rum and a little white rum. I really like both ways. Do we have any white rum, by the way? We do? Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. If you have white rum, what I want you to do and dark rum, you have to have dark rum. That's not optional. We're going to put in about 1/4 cup of the dark rum. So about 1/4 cup. And then we're going to put in 2 shots of the white rum. Now, if you didn't have the white rum, you would just put an additional 2 shots of the dark rum. And I'm going to go get that in just a moment. You won't see that. That'll be off screen. And then the last thing that I will recommend for you, and this is, again, is another technically optional thing, but I really think you should do it, that is the zest of an orange, about maybe like, I don't know, a teaspoon. Now, notice that this orange that I've zested, and you can use a zester or you can do what I've done, which is just use a what do you call them?
Cheese grater.
Cheese grater. You can also just use the finest grating side of a cheese grater. Notice that my orange doesn't have any white on it. All that I've gotten is the skin or the zest. If you get to the point where you can see the white, it's going to taste bitter. If any of you who are fond of alcoholic drinks, that's how you get bitters. Orange bitters is you're actually boiling the whole peel, so you get the bitter taste of the pith or the white part. We don't want that. So make sure that you are really mindful as you grate this, that you're only still seeing orange and no white. So I don't know, maybe like a teaspoon. I'm telling you, it's optional, but it will really make a very big difference. Just give me one moment and we'll get the white rum. You can cut. All right, so we are going to use a bundt pan. That is this traditional pan for a rum cake. We want to do this next step before we start mixing the cake batter, because once you have the wet and the dry ingredients mixed, you really want the batter into the oven as quickly as possible due to those leavening agents activated. Remember I said that we want to keep our butter wrappers, right? This is why. We're going to take those butter wrappers and in our clean pan, we're going to rub it very, very well indeed into all of the little nooks and crannies of our bundt pan. Bundt pans are notorious for sticking because of those little nooks that they have, which a lot of other pans don't have. And the more intricate the design of your bundt pan, the more important it is that you get every little corner here. Now, after you butter this, your next step will be to sprinkle some flour all on the buttered parts and then gently tap any remaining flour into the sink. I'll do that off screen. This is what a well-greased and floured bundt pan is going to look like, because we shook as much of the flour out as we could. All right, so now it is time. We are going to start combining our dry ingredients to our wet. Now this is the time you will definitely want your whisk, because you're going to fold in these ingredients. I like to do it in about 3 parts. This is a good time to say that my oven has been preheating to 380 degrees for about 30 minutes. The time when your oven beeps and tells you it's at the set temperature is never correct. You're going to need, I would recommend that you always give it an additional 20-30 minutes if you can. That might seem wasteful, but if it doesn't cook your baked goods properly, then what's the use? And the most efficient way to bake, therefore, is just to make sure that you're baking several things at one time. So that's why, in the olden days, people had a baking day to get the most use out of heating up their ovens. So folding, of course, is just taking your spatula down and to sides and up. This way we're not leaving any dry patches on the bottom or the sides. If you saw another baking video of mine, you know that we don't want to overmix flour. Overmixing flour develops the gluten. Gluten development is what makes things like bread chewy. We never, in most cases, want a chewy cake. And so we're just mixing until we don't see any big dry patches. If you should see a little bit of dry patch here and there, like for example, this is too much dry patch. But I'll show you what would be a fine amount of dry patch in just a moment. Like this would be a perfectly acceptable dry patch, so small. Okay. I think we're good. All right, we're going to go ahead and start to put this into our pan. This is a very thick batter, bundt pan recipes usually are pretty thick. Right tools for the job will always make things easier and faster. If you don't have a silicone spatula, you can get one for about $4 at Walmart. Mine was a 2-pack. It was like $5. It came from Sam's Club, 2-pack of them. And not only does it help you to fold, which is something that you could never do. If you had used that whisk, you would have definitely overbeaten your mixture by the time it was completely incorporated. But as you can see, it also makes cleanup a lot easier because it's going to get all of the batter off of the inside of the pan. Now, if I were using, let's say, a whisk or a spoon to do that, I'd be taking like 20 times longer to get all the batter out of this pan. I don't want to waste any batter. Let's bring all that batter with us. All right. Now, the thicker the batter, the more important it is that you gently wiggle your pan around to avoid air pockets. Yes, that almost sounds contradictory probably to what I said before. We wanted to incorporate air. Yes, we do, but we want it evenly incorporated. So I'm not part of the school of thought where we bang any pan on the counter. I think that takes out too much air. I just want to wiggle it around. All right, so now this is optional, but I really, really recommend that you do it. It's always easier to keep things clean than to clean them. So I recommend that you put this bundt pan on a cookie sheet in your oven. That way, just in case there should ever be any spillover, your oven stays clean. 380-degree oven, this is going to go in for about 55 to 65 minutes. All ovens are different. It also depends on how dark and how thick your pan is. This is a medium tone pan, and it's also a medium thickness. So I'm going to put mine in for 55 minutes. You can start to tell that your cake is done when a toothpick or a fork inserted into the center comes out pretty clean, and also you will see the sides start to pull away from the pan. In it goes. All right, so I forgot to say that I put our cake in the oven on the middle rack. The placement of whatever you're putting in the oven, it really does matter. While that is baking, let's get started on our rum glaze. So the cake, by the way, would be delicious without this, but this just amps it up. So in a small saucepan, and I do want you to choose a light color saucepan, not one that has the non-stick finish, which for reasons I will explain in a moment. We're going to cut up 5 tablespoons of butter. Don't put a whole hard stick of butter into here. It will take too long to melt. And by the time the inner part is melted, the outer part will be burned. If you are new to baking, you may have never noticed that sticks of butter are always going to include the measurement. So if you cut from here to here, that's a tablespoon. So we needed 5 tablespoons of butter. We are going to add some sugar. Now, we want a total of a half of a cup of sugar. You can use any sugar that you want. I'm going to mix it up half and half. So a quarter of a cup of white sugar, a quarter of a cup of light brown sugar. You even use dark brown sugar if you want, but that's what I'm using, a quarter cup of each. We're also going to add, because I'm using unsalted butter in this case, we're going to add about half a teaspoon of salt. And then we're also going to add a couple of tablespoons of whipping cream. You could add milk. I'm adding heavy cream here for richness. And then we're also going to be adding rum. How much rum you add is kind of up to you. It's not really about how much you add, but when you add it, as for how much alcohol you actually want, how much alcohol taste that you want. If you add it at the beginning part of the melting, which I'm going to recommend you add about a quarter of a cup, you're going to, or sorry, not a quarter cup, half of a cup. I recommend you add about half of a cup. If you add it at the beginning, you're going to get less rum flavor because a lot of the alcohol will cook out. If you put this closer to the end of the melting of your sauce, you're going to get a lot more alcohol and a lot more rum flavor. So up to you, but we're going to go about half of a cup of that. So I'm going to take this over to the stove top. We'll start to melt this on low, medium heat. Keep an eye on it. As I said, you don't want to use something that has a dark bottom. Anytime that you're melting or browning butter, if you have a dark bottom pan, you can't see when the melting or brown butter starts to burn. The milk solids, when they burn in the butter, it tastes bitter, it tastes nasty. That's not how you want your cake to taste, I assume. So I'm just letting that to mix here. This will really just take just a minute. The more you cut up your butter finely, the faster this process will go. And you can cut, and I'll just be back in a minute.
Go ahead.
So if you have normally not baked, or if you're used to boxed cake mixes, you might say, wow, this sounds like a lot of work. So most of the time that this has taken has been me describing the ingredients to you and why we're doing certain things and talking about substitutions. If this were just you making this on your own, there wouldn't be any of that. If this were just me making this on my own, I do this cake from memory. I've made this cake so many times. I don't. So it becomes so fast. It really is almost as fast as a box cake mix, minus all of the chemicals, which are scientists say may be responsible for causing allergy attacks, asthma attacks. A lot of these chemicals don't break down. They're like forever chemicals. They do not break down in our bodies. And not to mention, this is going to taste so much better. So it really doesn't take as long as it seems due to the video. Okay, that's just something I want to mention. Okay, so as I said, we have 5 tablespoons of butter. We have a total of a half of a cup of sugar. I used half and half types of sugar. We're now going to add I'll say about 2 tablespoons of cream. You can use milk. And then we're going to add about a half of a cup of rum. You could use white rum, you could use dark, you could use a mix. I don't really want this to boil over. The main point of melting this is just so that the butter melts, and I completely want my sugar liquefied. I don't want it grainy. So I am not going to let my mix boil over. If you let your mix boil over, you will be cooking out a lot of the alcohol. So I don't know how much alcohol you really want in your cake. The alcohol has baked out of the cake that's in the oven. So we put a little alcohol, okay? So I'm putting in my half of a cup. Once this is well incorporated and I start to see the first bits of bubbles, I will turn off the heat. I will let this sit. When our cake comes out of the oven, I will let it cool in its pan for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, before I start to gently work it out of the pan and invert it. And then we'll start to pour the glaze over it. You can cut. This is our cake out of the oven. We ideally will use this wire rack to rest the cake pan, because if we just keep this on the cookie sheet where we had it, it's going to continue to cook way more than we want it to. So this wire rack has aeration underneath, and just let the air circulate and let it cool off a lot faster. What I have done is I have taken a fork as soon as I pull this out of the oven, and I pierced 12 piercings of the fork around the cake. That's a traditional thing for Christmas, 12 days of Christmas. Pierce the cake 12 times. Oh, if you end up doing it closer to 15, that's also fine. So we don't want to pour our glaze, excuse me, into this cake just yet. And that is because it'll just make the cake soggy. We want the cake to have at least 20, maybe 30 minutes to cool here in the pan. And then you have two options. You can either pour this glaze into the bottom, or you can invert it and you can pour the glaze over the top. I think the safe thing to do, if you have any doubt as to your cake's ability to come out of the pan, is to invert it and then pour it over the top. But today, we're going to put it into the bottom of the cake and then invert it. Do you see what I mean when I say you will start to see the cake pulling away from the pan? This is what we mean. This is your cake pulling away from the pan. So we know this cake is going to come out perfectly from the pan. So here is our buttered rum cake. Came out perfectly. I would say probably about a quarter of the glaze went into the bottom of the cake. Another quarter of the glaze went over the top of the cake. And then I'm reserving the rest of the glaze here to be poured over individual slices as I cut it. I do like using a serrated knife to cut cakes. And there you go. I really hope that you try it. And happy holidays. Merry Christmas.